Good morning and welcome to another edition of 15 Minutes of Flame. This is Robert Phoenix broadcasting to you live from Austin, Texas. Just getting a little bit of a late start today, but that's okay. I have been deep in the bowels of research and putting things together for today's show, which is what I try to do before I actually put my face behind this microphone. So how is everybody today? It's another beautiful day in the neighborhood. We got sunshine here, blue skies, not a wispy chemtrail cloud in the sky. And that's how we like it, although that may not be how it stays. So a lot of fascinating things, as always, going on in that big, wide world of a matrix we're living in. And we're going to go over some of the details that are still kind of shaken out from Las Vegas. First, two things about Las Vegas that I want to report from a personal level. These are through two separate contacts that I had within the last 24 hours with a couple of people, a beautiful couple who are clients, friends of the show, sent me an email yesterday, and it was specifically about how somebody that they knew very close was actually wounded in Las Vegas. So it's going to refute this story that nobody got hurt and nobody died. I met another guy yesterday, just down the road here, Jack Allen's a very interesting guy, by the way, and he told me that a friend of his was there, and this guy's in the music business, so a friend of his was there and was one of the civilian first responders. That he was actually, applying basic tourniquets to people that were wounded in the killing field. So here's just the model for Las Vegas itself. I believe it's a hybrid model, and we've started seeing more of the hybrid model as it relates to these events, because for a while, what we had these false flags, which were clearly false flags, where nobody died, people were not hurt. I mean, we can cite them, numerous versions of this. Santa Barbara likely is one of them. I'm not sure that anybody actually died at the Pulse nightclub. If they did, it was another hybrid event and a false flag within a false flag, or a psyop within a false flag. Boston Marathon, forget about it. Pure theater. And of course, Sandy Hook, I'm in the camp that no kids died there. Okay, and that Adam Lanza is a creation, is a hybrid of himself, who really doesn't exist, and his brother. So, but we're at a point now, because we've become so inured to the potential of nothing actually happening, that on some level probably something needed to happen. And it is looking more and more like this wasn't just some kind of random deal that Stephen Paddock walked into and became a patsy. It seems like there is a fair amount of planning that went into this on a number of different levels, and maybe even some of the planning went wrong at some point for one of the groups. Because one of the things that the FBI has done for many years is they have really excelled at entrapment. that is one of the best skills that the FBI has created and honed and polished as entrapment, and that's finding somebody and recruiting them through some kind of an operative, somebody who appears to be someone whom they're not, and bring them into a group or bring them into an operation. And then when the operation is supposed to happen in a way that it's been laid out, all of a sudden nobody's there, and they become this kind of unwilling patsy. And this is one of the ways that the FBI stays relevant. They create their own enemies. It's the same thing that happens with groups like Al-Qaeda, Taliban, ISIS, ISIL, whatever you want to call them. Those are all created. We put money behind them. We funded them. And so we create our own opposition to fight against. And this is how wars are funded, both internally and externally. The war on terror outside of us, and the war on terror inside of us or inside this country. And the United States is not immune, by the way. I've been looking through and perusing the 90's, which we're going to talk about after we get through the Vegas updates. Is that the 90's are really the bed and the foundation for everything that happens post 9/11/2001. You can just see it. You can just see the fertilization of what's taking place in the 1990's, and we'll get into that. But getting back to Las Vegas, apparently Jesus Campos has left the United States, and he has returned to Mexico. Okay, so was Jesus Campos a citizen of the United States? This is an interesting question. And if he wasn't, then I don't know. It just raises all kinds of yellow, turning to orange, turning to red flags on Jesus Campos. The biggest red flag is he was only employed by the MGM or by Mandalay, owned by MGM for a month. Really, I mean, he just was kind of inserted there. But there is the strange photo of him at the Jean-Georges restaurant where he's receiving his award, which looks like it's happening in June or July of this year, because that restaurant got renovated. So we come back to the fact that, was Jesus Campos all part of this? Was he all part of it? Was he brought in to play this role? And does he ever even really exist in the way that we believe him to exist? It's all very strange. It adds yet another layer and wrinkle of illusion and deception to the entire event. We want to believe that this guy is a hero. We want to believe that this guy saw something. We want to believe that he could be a key witness in being able to unveil some layer of truth that we are all being denied. That will not be the case. We will probably never see Jesus Campos again. It would be very interesting to find out where he is in Mexico, but good luck finding a Jesus Campos in Mexico, or this Jesus Campos. It would be like finding a needle in a haystack. The other strange event or strange bit of information that's come out of this is that Stephen Paddock has a brother, not Eric Paddock, but Bruce Paddock. And here we go. Here's another strange angle, strange twist to what's happening in Las Vegas, or what happened in Las Vegas. The estranged, there's that word again. The estranged brother of Las Vegas gunman Stephen Paddock was arrested on Wednesday on child pornography charges. This is from NBC News, by the way, stemming from an investigation that predates the massacre. Bruce Paddock, 58, was detained at a Los Angeles assisted living facility where he was awaiting surgery for spinal stenosis. A felony complaint said he had over 600 explicit images of minors in 2014 and had also swapped pornography. Well, pornography is as far as I know, you're not breaking the law with pornography. If that pornography happens to include images of children, well, clearly, then the law is being broken. But it says here that he has images of minors in 2014 and also swap pornography. I don't know what that explicitly means. He faces 19 counts of sexual exploitation of a child and 1 count of possession of child pornography. The complaint says he's being held on $60,000 bond. His brother was alive or in circulation, which he might be. That money would be easy to come up with because apparently Stephen Paddock had a lot of FU money because he traveled whenever he wanted, wherever he wanted. The LAPD said the images were discovered inside a building where Paddock was squatting, but they could not find him at the time. After his brother's crime, they learned where he was and obtained a warrant, police said. An attorney who Paddock said had represented him in criminal matters in the past told NBC he's no longer representing him. He declined to comment. Another brother, Eric Paddock, who lives in Florida, said he had no comment on the arrest. Eric, of course, being the strange and unusual brother that we were introduced to via his interviews with the press. At the time of the mass shooting on October 1st that left 58 dead, Bruce Paddock told NBC News he had not been in touch with his brother Stephen for 10 years and had no idea why the professional gambler would have opened fire on music festival attendees from his room at the Mandalay Bay. I don't know how he could stoop to this low point, hurting someone else. It wasn't suicide by cops since he killed himself. He said that he killed a bunch of people and then killed himself, so he didn't have to face whatever it was. Well, you know, he didn't know him. He was out of circulation with him, theoretically, for 10 years. It was Bruce Paddock who revealed that their father was a bank robber who once made the FBI's most wanted list and was judged by authorities to be psychopathic and with suicidal tendencies. Yow. Interesting. The sins of the father cast upon the son. But he insisted that his brother wasn't mentally deranged and noted that Stephen had never been in trouble with the law like he had. So he got the psychopathic gene. Court records show Bruce Paddock has a criminal record stretching back to the 1980s with convictions for vandalism, criminal thefts, threats, theft, and driving with a suspended vehicle, and other arrests which he was not convicted. Paddock was annoyed that his brother's monstrous crime had brought attention to his own misdeeds, which he described as minor. He had to scramble to pay a fine after it was reported, and there was an active warrant for his arrest from a vandalism case in which he had to perform community service. You know what's really interesting? If you go back and look at the early pieces of the Stephen Paddock profile, the same kind of light criminality that is described here by Bruce Paddock, which is that he had failed to, he had an active warrant, and then there was some vandalism, I believe was attributed to Stephen Paddock. If I'm not mistaken, this is it was one of the early kind of hits we got from that profile, Stephen Paddock, that he had some trouble with the Las Vegas Police Department and had some vandalism, and there was a fine and a warrant. So this is very interesting. We've got a lot of super snoops out there listening, and if you can confirm that, or somebody can confirm that, that would be absolutely great. He says, I'm not proud of it, he said, but I never went to prison. FBI agents visited him twice after the shooting. He said, and we're mostly interested in his brother's childhood. In the days after the Vegas carnage, Paddock frantically tried to reconnect with members of his fractured family, leaving messages from another brother, Eric, and reaching out to the attorney for Stephen's girlfriend, Mary Lou Danley. I want to see if we could patch up what we destroyed so many years ago, he said. He added that he only succeeded in reaching his elderly mother, and she's yelling at me all the time not to talk to anyone. Earlier this week, Paddock said he was concerned about the fate of his brother's remains and reached out to the coroner's office in Nevada to see if he could claim them. Well, there probably are no remains, because I am seriously doubt that whoever was up there was Stephen Paddock. And there are people who say that Stephen Paddock did not exist. I totally disagree with that. I believe he did exist. I don't believe he is a composite of Eric Paddock, by the way, either, because Stephen actually had a real estate role. Now, Eric Paddock doesn't have a lot connected to him. If you go into Intellis, you don't see a lot for Eric Paddock, but you see plenty for Stephen. And I can see why some people would think about that and say, well, this is another Adam Lanza composite with his brother. Anyway, these are the latest details, strange details, strange twists, and bizarre pieces that are emerging out of Las Vegas. Jesus Campos, adios amigo. It's likely we'll never see you again. You did what you needed to do, and you were rewarded amply by Ellen. And by the way, who's going to get Jesus Campos season tickets for the Las Vegas Raiders? I want to know, because he can't see him from Mexico, wherever he is. But he may surface back. He may resurface a few years from now. Oh, look who's back. It's Jesus Campos. Remember him, the hero of Las Vegas? Well, he's here to attend his first Raider game. He had to go to Mexico to heal himself, both physically, emotionally, and psychologically. But now he's come back to America to reclaim his place as a blue-blooded American. And not only that, a blue-blooded American hero. You know, isn't it interesting, too? And I'm just kind of throwing this out there. You know, I'm not a xenophobe. I like everybody. I'm not a xenophobe. But I understand that we are being placed in this unusual predicament where we're being flooded by groups of people at rates where assimilation is really, really difficult. And one of the great things about the Latin American community is how seamlessly they've assimilated and become part of this country. And it's been, interesting to watch over time. And there's just been this grafting that's occurred in a really kind of organic and seamless way because of the nature of the relationship with Mexico and various countries from Central America. It's been part of a process, whether you agree with it or not, whether you think that it needs checks and balances. And I think all the immigration pieces need checks and balances. Bottom line, end of story. But, there's been this seamless integration, and it's because it's happened over time, right? It's been happening since the 1920s or 1930s, at kind of a more accelerated rate in a lot of ways. But what's happening now is the groups that are coming in and the numbers that are coming in, it's like the level of assimilation is very, very difficult. And to some extent, these are groups that don't assimilate, that they have no desire to assimilate. So what they want to do is create their own slice of their experience from another country in what they call no-go zones in a lot of ways. I mean, obviously the one that is the most famous is Dearborn, Michigan, where the entire city has been turned into an Islamic state. Anyway, I'm not going to get into Islamophobia. I'm not an Islamophobe, but on the other hand, I also see that the system is being gamed, and there are people who are being weaponized, and there's a radicalization that's taking place, and our own goodwill and our own sense of compassion and the last vestiges of whatever the Christian ethos that has been sort of leached off into the new age intolerance is being taken advantage of. Anyway, but if you think about Jesus Campos, he does represent this kind of cipher in some ways, that he's a hero, and guess what? He's from Mexico. Who's the hero in all this? It's Jesus Campos. Who's the villain in all of this? It's Stephen Paddock. And so we have this really very distinct distillation of kind of the strange, crazy, angry, depressed, who knows what, white guy with a gun in a tower. Okay? Middle-aged white guy with a gun in the tower loses his shit and decides to start taking people out. And the one so-called hero in the event is the security guy who's probably from Mexico, and he's able to, I don't know, save lives. Was he really able to? And now, do you see what emerges out of all this? It's a very interesting kind of piece, right? Because it somehow reaffirms that there is this narrative going on that our immigrant class is great. They sacrifice themselves, working jobs that are dangerous, like security in a casino, and the old white guy is dangerous. He's the dangerous guy. He's the one that you really need to watch out for. Now, whether or not that's implicit in this, right, or explicit in this, certainly it's implied. And it's an interesting kind of thing to think about. And now Jesus Campos has left the building, just like Elvis from Las Vegas. And then we've got the strange Bruce Paddock connection as well. Las Vegas, we will continue to talk about it and continue to untangle the threads as best we can every single day with this podcast, even if it's for 5 to 10 minutes. So one of the things I talked about 2 days ago is about this whole idea that there's a war taking place, and there's been a war on this soil for a while now. Now, we could look at 9/11/2001 as the shot across the bow with that war. Or we could go back to 11/22/63. Oh, by the way, the Kennedy records have been released. I don't have a lot of high hope for the Kennedy records, by the way. I'm sure there'll be a ton of redaction. If there isn't a ton of redaction, then we'll see probably real, milquetoast records and real milquetoast kind of information. So I don't have a lot of hope for them being released. Although it's interesting from a timeline perspective, because this gets into the whole Trump-Kennedy kind of mirroring of one another, and we've gone into this before. It's a really fascinating kind of exercise, which I don't really want to repeat today, but essentially, I'll do the Reader's Digest version. Essentially, there are a number of events and pieces that connect Trump and Kennedy. One of which is that they're both outsiders. I mean, that's like high level. I believe Kennedy was the only Catholic ever elected to the presidency of the United States. And Trump, while he's not a Catholic, he has the same kind of outsider status that Kennedy did when he was elected. Trump is a Gemini, Kennedy is a Gemini, and then there's this whole relationship with Trump and 9/11 and Kennedy and 9/11 and Dallas and the whole timeline that unfolds from that. So, and there's more to it than that. I mean, we could go pretty deep with the Trump-Kennedy timeline. So here on Trump's watch, he's releasing the Kennedy files, and I believe, if I'm not mistaken, Trump is actually coming to Dallas. And we're coming up on 11/22. 11/22 is not that far off. It's less than a month from today. And we're also coming up on 11/9, which is the 1-year anniversary of the election, which was the inverse of 9/11. So again, there's the connection between 9/11 and Kennedy, and it's all part of this timeline. It's all part of a significant timeline. And so here Trump is playing his role again. Now, are we morphing back? In some ways we are. I mean, if you think about it, even like what Trump stands for with making America great again, or whoever's playing the role of Trump right now is the synthetic robotord, or maybe it's Trump himself, or it's a tag team effort. It's part of kind of like America before the fall. And the fall is 11/22/63. There is no doubt about that. That is the fall of the United States. This is when the military-industrial complex, the CIA, the intelligence groups, they all take over at that point. Lyndon Baines Johnson becomes president as he accelerates the Vietnam War. There was a commenter / listener who made an astute comment about Democrats being just as war hungry as the Republicans. This is true. And Johnson, who was advised by Kennedy's wise men at the time, was told to ramp up the war effort in Vietnam. And Kennedy did start the war in Vietnam. One of the reasons why, though, Kennedy was assassinated is he wanted to get us out. There was a plethora of reasons why Kennedy was taken out. And wanting to get out of Vietnam was one of them. So they needed to have that war in place because they needed to secure the trade of the Golden Triangle, amongst other things. Of course, that trade was opium, which helps greatly fund black budget projects and all that other stuff. Destabilize inner cities, wipe out huge portions of the black American male population. And there's no coincidence that after the Vietnam War, there is the rise of single families in urban communities. And hey, lo and behold, there's a lot of welfare dollars there to boot to replace the men, who many of whom were killed at a far too early age in Vietnam, or came back completely psychologically scarred and or hooked on drugs. So there was a plan in place there, a plan in place. Now, Johnson did not seek to run for a second term, which he could have. But I believe that on some level, even though Johnson was I believe Johnson was deeply complicit with the Kennedy assassination, he realized that running for a second term would be pretty much a death sentence. Now, whether or not he felt betrayed by the likes of Kennedy's wise men, that's a whole other story that we'd have to figure out. And I don't have any information around that. I've read that because he felt betrayed, that ultimately they revealed to him that this was a non-winnable war because of the rules of engagement, that he wasn't going to run again. I don't know if that's true or not, because Lyndon Johnson had big cojones, literally and figuratively. So that wouldn't have stopped him from running if he knew that he was going to win. So what's interesting, though, is that, yes, he ramped up the war effort. The last Democrat that we had before Barack Obama, Bill Clinton, was strong-armed to ramp up his war efforts, especially in places like Kosovo. And as we can see in the 90s, everything that happens with Iraq that will take place post 9/11/2001 was already being orchestrated in the 1990s. There were inspections with Iraq's nuclear power facilities going all the way back to 1997. That's how far back this whole thing went with Iraq. And then, of course, they had the sanctions and the no-fly zones over Iraq. So they were really beginning to target Iraq in the 1990s. So after 9/11/2001 happened, they could flip that switch and they could go grab those resources. Anyway, what I was trying to say about the Democrats is that if you looked at the populace during the 1960s, the Democrats were essentially anti-war. The actual presidency may not have been anti-war, but the populace was. And they were behind a candidate like George McGovern, who was an anti-war candidate. Of course, McGovern got crushed by Richard Nixon. They were behind Hubert Humphrey, who theoretically would have been an anti-war candidate. Another person who got crushed by Richard Nixon. So the people at that time were anti-war, and they were defining themselves, if they defined themselves politically, with the Democratic Party, because it was the other party, it wasn't the party that was in office at that time that was responsible for the war. But yes, by and large, the Democrats have had just as at a governmental level, they've had just about as much of a taste for war as their Republican counterparts, since both are deeply tied into the military-industrial complex and what that means for them in terms of re-election and all the perks that go along with it. So I just wanted to touch on that point since it was brought up in the comments section, and I wanted to agree with that and also expand upon it a little bit. Okay, so let's go back in time. I'm just going to look at the 90s today. We're going to maybe stretch this out a little bit, and I'm going to bring up a few events here that are really worth examining. Let me get my other computer up here, which has all the information. Some of these things you're already going to know about, and I'm going to repeat them. But I'm repeating them so you understand that there's a pattern going on here. Okay, hold on. All right, so let's go back. This is a really interesting little factoid. Oh, by the way, the JFK files released under a Capricorn moon. It's an interesting moon to release the files under, specifically because it deals with Capricorn, the administrators of the state. Okay, so in August 21st, now this is an interesting day because if you move forward in time, August 21st is the day of the eclipse. That's like August 21st. 2017 is the day of the solar eclipse, the full solar eclipse, 28 degrees. So August 21st in 1992, which would be at that same 28 degree Leo aspect, Ruby Ridge happens. Now some of you may know about Ruby Ridge, some of you may not know about Ruby Ridge, but to me this is kind of where it all starts in some ways. The Ruby Ridge has to do with Randy Weaver and his wife and his daughter. And Randy Weaver was, I wouldn't call him a separatist, although some people might. Clearly, he was somebody who didn't have a lot of interest in government and the IRS. And he was somebody who was starting to make connections locally amongst other people in the state of Idaho, which is where he was living at that time. So he was posing, he was being seen as potentially a threat. And you'll see this throughout the Clinton administration in the 90s, where they're really targeting, they're not targeting the terrorist group from abroad, although you'll also see that the bombing of the World Trade Center on February 26th takes place in 1993, which is a pretty significant event. Ramzi Yousef, there were 6 people that died in the World Trade Center bombing in 1993. It is vastly overshadowed by what happens on 9/11, 2001. But so Randy Weaver has his wife who was carrying their infant child. They were both shot and killed in basically what was a raid on his house in Ruby Ridge, Idaho. And this was the ATF, and in conjunction, I believe, with the FBI. So they raided him. And what happens as a result of this is he gets into a siege. It's about a 10-day siege and a shootout because he's got guns, he's got bullets, and he manages, and this is kind of amazing, he manages to hold them off long enough so that he's not wiped out, he's not taken out. And then after Ruby Ridge happens and he has to deal with the death of his wife and the death of his child, he sues the FBI and the government, and he wins millions of dollars because they had absolutely no right to do what they did and take the life of his wife and his child. But this is an important event because it starts on October 21st, 1992, and kind of kicks off the 90s. And not long after that, we go into February of 1993. That's the 26th. Now, this is really interesting. This is really, really interesting. The World Trade Center experiences a bomb, a pretty serious bomb. Ramzi Yousef is the guy that is, again, the quote-unquote mastermind wanting to blow up the World Trade Center. And there are links, once again, to perhaps the involvement of the FBI and other agencies who are getting Ramzi Youssef everything he needs in order to bomb the World Trade Center. But just 2 days after that, the incident at Waco starts to take place. So we have on February 26, 93, the bombing of the World Trade Center, and on February 28th, 1993, Waco happens. And that siege, of course, ends on 4/19/93, and that sets up a whole series of 4/19, 4/20 events that are part of this triad that takes place over the course of the next 6 years. And that's the first one. That is the first one. Okay. Now, this is not necessarily the same kind of war against the people of the United States from how shall I say this, a tactical level. But on the 1st of January, 1994, NAFTA is passed. And clearly, that is something that a lot of people just haven't taken into account at this level, because all of a sudden, we have all these jobs that are going to Mexico. Unfortunately, our friends in Mexico get priced out of their land. They become dispossessed. They have to come to this country and restart their lives because all of a sudden things got too expensive, and the multinational corporations wanted to go in and take up valuable land held by small farmers with families and family-run farms, of which one of my neighbors in California was one of them. Great guy, totally great guy, wonderful guy, lost his farm. It wasn't a big farm. They had some animals. They grew some stuff. And NAFTA gets passed, and all of a sudden everything becomes too expensive. The cost of fertilizer, the cost of fuel, everything that he needed to run his farm became too expensive. He couldn't afford it anymore. He was losing money. He needed to get out. He needed to sell his farm. Of course, that land was bought likely by one of the multinational corporations, and he comes to the United States and is a janitor. Can you believe that? Can you believe that? I mean, here's a guy. He's got dignity. He's got a life. He's got a family. He's a good guy, and he's got a farm, and he's got to just let it all go, suck it up, and start cleaning toilets. Holy shit! I mean, it's such a fall, and much to his hard work and dedication and love for his family, he eventually got a job working on homes and became kind of a handyman, repairman, and also built things, for subcontractors. So he got on his feet. But his wife, a lovely woman, was so pissed off about the whole thing that she refused to learn English. She refused to learn English. Nice lady. But that's dedication. That's dedication to the suffering in a lot of ways. So on April 1st of January 1994, NAFTA takes place. That's huge. That's huge. It is an invisible barrage against the people in the United States. Of course, other countries have their own version of NAFTA. We are not alone in this. So this part of it's part of the network of globalization. Okay, April 19th, 1995. Here we go. It's the Oklahoma City bombing, and Terry Nichols and Timothy McVeigh. They were again kind of radicalized. There were people that were part of their group that all of a sudden disappeared. These guys were living in Elohim City in Arizona. And, of course, their little fertilizer bomb couldn't have exploded the Murrah building to that degree. I mean, come on, let's get real. And in fact, if you go back in time, there's that guy, Brigadier General Parton, who went through the basement of the Murrah building, and he found all kinds of plastic explosives down there. And when he brought it up, they said, oh, yeah, well, we keep these down there just in case we want to have a drill. Are you kidding me? Are we that stupid? October 9th, this is a really interesting story. It is the Palo Verde derailment. And a lot of people don't know about this. But it was a train, October 9th, 1995, it was a train that got derailed. And let me just read you, let me try to see if I can find the story here. This is an interesting story. Let me go here. Let me just do this. Okay. So this goes back to October 10th, 2015. It is the unsolved Arizona mystery. Who derailed Sunset Limited? Okay, so I'm going to go back here. Let me just read. I'll just read you this story. October 9th, 1995. In 1995, someone cut the tracks in the deep desert. An Amtrak train ran off the rails, leaving one man dead. Today, the question remains, who did it and why? It's a very interesting story. One of these unsolved crimes that was actually, at that time, pinned on a group, and a group that may not have even existed. In the earliest hours of Monday, October 9th, 1995, Amtrak Sunset Limited train sped westward through the Arizona desert bound for California. Some 70 miles southwest of Phoenix, around 1:30 a.m., it lurched violently. 8 passenger cars derailed and 4 fell off of a bridge into a dry riverbed, according to reports at the time. The crash killed 1 person, an Amtrak employee, and injured 78 others. Investigators would later find unmistakable signs of sabotage, along with cryptic notes that railed at the government. They vowed to find whoever was responsible. 2 decades later, the case is still open. Neil Halford, who boarded the Sunset Limited 2 days before in San Antonio, it would have been much easier and faster to fly to San Diego, where his then girlfriend lived, but he opted to take Amtrak instead. At the time, he was having a real problem with plane phobia, Halford said. For Halford, the train trip had proved so far uneventful, if restless. A crying baby in an adjacent compartment made it difficult to sleep the night before, he remembered. Shortly after midnight on October 9th, 1995, he finally drifted to sleep. At about 1:30 a.m., a loud crashing sound jolted Halford awake as he was thrown into the seat in front of him. His dinner tray table was still down and jammed into his ribs. The train had come to a halt. The cars had gone pitch black. Passengers would later learn that the engine had separated from the rest of the compartments. For the time, though, Halford could only hear other riders shouting through the dark, trying to figure out what had happened. After a short while, a steward from the railroad came out. Halford said he'd let us know that the train had derailed. The Amtrak representative told passengers that they may need to start bringing injured people to the back of the train. When asked everyone to stay inside, Halford remembered it was dark outside and there were scorpions and snakes in the desert. Halford seems like he might have a few issues. The train's 2 engine cars had jumped the tracks. The rest of the Sunset Limited jackknifed in the middle. Silver passenger cars with panoramic windows topping out into the dark. 8 cars derailed. 4 had fallen 30 feet from a trestle bridge. The worst lay on their sides, shattered. The crash killed 1 person, an Amtrak sleeping car attendant named Mitchell Bates. Back in the intact cars, most people heeded the steward's advice for about an hour, Halford said, before conditions on the train were becoming rather unlivable fairly quickly. The air conditioning had gone out and the toilets were no longer flushing. Getting hot, Halford decided to get some fresh air outside of the train car. He stepped right out of the right side of the train and walked around to get a better sense of what had happened to the rest of the cars ahead. About 12 feet from the trail, under the light of the moon, Halford spotted a piece of paper under a rock. I wasn't thinking anything sinister at the time, Halford said. I was just thinking this is a little odd for this piece of paper to just be laying out here in the middle of nowhere. He took the note out from under the rock and scanned its typewritten message. I read the first 2 or 3 lines of what's in this note, and I go, oh my God, he said, I'm holding a note from the people who intentionally just tried to kill everybody on this train. About 50 miles away, earlier in the evening, Pat Borey had been settling into her graveyard shift as a dispatcher for the town of Buckeye. She had moved her family to the tiny farming community in 1980 when it had 1 traffic light, later 2, and a population of about 5,000 people. It was a very, very quiet town, Marie said. She had worked as a Buckeye dispatcher for 10 years, and the overnight shift was nothing new to her. On that night, she was training a new dispatcher. The most eventful calls that come in then were usually about barking dogs or someone having a heart attack. Shortly after 1:30 a.m. on October 9th, 1995, Borey received a call from a Maricopa County Sheriff's deputy. There had been a train derailment. He told her the location was unclear, maybe somewhere near Tonopah. But Buckeye would likely be the closest town. Since the Buckeye Fire Department was made up of volunteers, he suggested she start giving them a heads up. Okay, so this goes on and on and on and on and on and on. More talk about the first responders. So the group, okay, here we go. Here we go. The derailment of the Sunset Limited would be widely covered by the media. This was well before September 11th, 2001, but only a few months after the bombing of the Alfred P. Murrah Federal Building in Oklahoma City. The mysterious notes at the crash site only fueled the fervor. Neil Halford ultimately discovered 2 notes under rocks around the crash site, which he reported to authorities that day. In addition, investigators reportedly found 2 additional notes. In all of them, a group claimed responsibility for the sabotage and berated the government's involvement in federal standoffs at Waco, Texas, and Ruby Ridge, Idaho. The group, the note said, was called the Sons of the Gestapo. I mean, is that just a ridiculous fucking name or what? If you were going to be a group that was going to inflict damage upon the American people, would you call yourselves the Sons of Gestapo? Of the Gestapo? My God. It's so hackneyed and cliched. Please, come up with a better name. Unless, of course, you're not really a group, but you may be some kind of counterinsurgent terrorist faction that was creating a false flag under the name of some group that didn't exist, but you wanted to use that name in such a way that would give you the most oomph. For weeks, investigators scoured the derailment site and surrounding area for clues, interviewing hundreds of people and tracking thousands of leads. An early theory held that whoever is responsible must have had some knowledge of train operations. Investigators discovered someone had pulled 27 spikes from the tracks and forced the rails apart, installing a metal plate with spikes to prevent the tracks from reconnecting. Whoever did so also used a jumper wire to bypass a computer system that would have warned train engineers of track failures, according to reports at the time. But who did that and why was less than clear. People who researched domestic extremism said they had never heard of the Sons of the Gestapo. Doubts surfaced that it was an established militia group, and investigators began to wonder if the notes in the group were intentionally misleading. In 20 years, authorities have also never linked the Amtrak derailment with any other terrorist attack. The FBI's head agent on the case today said he could not comment on whether that theory remained true, but noted that even today the crash site is extremely isolated. Whoever accessed it was likely familiar with the area, said Michael Lum, an FBI special agent. It's one of those places that if you don't know how to get there, you get lost. It truly is. Lum said it's in the middle of nowhere, even today. Nowadays, driving to the crash site from Buckeye would take about an hour, and that's on much improved roads. On and on and on and on and on. So it says, I wish they had caught somebody. This is about the dispatcher, Boree, that's her name. She goes on and says, I wish they would have caught someone. Halford says the same thing. He wound up riding a car back to Phoenix later, where a hotel had been set up as a crisis center. Miraculously, he beat the Sunset Limited passengers who were still slowly making their way back to Phoenix. This Halford guy seems rather interesting. I think he should have a bit more attention here. Miraculously, he finds the notes under the rocks. Miraculously, he gets to the hotel before anybody else. I'm just saying, it's an interesting series of miraculous events for Mr. Halford. He spoke to Amtrak representatives who would send him to San Diego via Greyhound bus. Halford wouldn't speak publicly about the accident until 2001 when a BBC documentary crew contacted him. For Halford, the crash has remained something he has recalled regularly over the past 2 decades. In 2012, he self-published a book about his experience on the train, The Derailment of the Sunset Limited. He also maintains a Facebook page with any news about the incident. It has been sparse. I wish they had caught somebody, Halford said. It's just weird and surreal that it's gone on this long without anything solid, without any suspects arrested. So there's a $310,000 reward that the FBI has put out, $250,000 from the FBI, $50,000 from Amtrak, and $10,000 from Maricopa County. So, just in case you are really into some sleuthing, you want to find out who did this, there's $300,000 out there waiting for you. If you can find who did the derailment of the Amtrak train, it's a very interesting event because it takes place during this whole sequence that we've been looking at here, and again, it's been lumped in with Ruby Ridge and Waco and all that other stuff that was going on. And we're not even done yet. The Palo Verde derailment is on October 9th, 1995. On July 27th, we have the bombing of the Olympic Village where in Atlanta, where Richard Jewell is wrongly accused of being involved in that bombing. And of course, the anti-terror bill is passed shortly thereafter by the Clinton administration. And then April 20th, that's part of that 419 sequence, 419, 420 sequence. 419 Waco, 419 Oklahoma City bombing, and April 20th, 1999, Columbine happens. And then we're just a stone's throw away, really, 2001, from what's going to take place in New York on 9/11. And of course, there's more. And what we'll do is I'll track now from basically 1999 through 2001 and see what also leads up and into the 9/11 event. But the Palo Verde derailment is quite interesting because they never caught anybody. There was some bogus group that they had attributed this to. Clearly, this was some kind of attempt to create a broader picture of domestic terrorism that was really kind of at the front of the Clinton regime. It was at the front of their a lot of their operations during the 1990s, because what they wanted to do clearly was to nip some form of awakening in the bud during the 90s. And this is all coming just before the internet. The internet's just starting to come online in the 90s, and the viral spread of information is about to take place. All right, so why don't we wind up there for today, and we'll maybe sink back into this tomorrow during the Friday Forecast and go a little bit deeper through these events that are pretty curious in many ways, and also when you link them together, you'll see a more connected pattern on both a visceral and physical level, like for instance Ruby Ridge and the World Trade Center bombing and Waco and all that stuff, but also with NAFTA as well, which is a huge event and really rewired this country and other countries in the North American Union in ways that may not have always been the best for any country involved in it. In fact, they weren't at all. All right, well, let's bring this train into the station intact today. And as always, I try to leave you with something of promise, something that's positive, so that as we work through this process, we are not just engaging in some form of temporary trauma during my show. And really, what it comes down to is that we're in a time now, again, I was having this conversation last night with this fellow I met who had some interesting things to say about our friend Alex Jones, which I don't want to get into. But we're at a time where all this is starting to surface. It is the boil that is getting ready to be lanced. This is a fascinating time, absolutely fascinating time. And we talked about this the other day as we watch both sides begin to devour themselves. It's incredible to witness, really incredible to witness. And if this pattern continues, and we see more of this evolution of the Ouroboros taking place, there will be on some level these pieces of vindication. And maybe vindication is the wrong word. There will be levels and pieces where we're getting some kind of feedback, right, from the biofeedback loop in the physical realm, where we understand that our awakening process is absolutely worth it. Because even though some of us may not be directly involved in writing legislature, or we may not be directly involved in blowing whistles, as the awakening process takes place, there is a metaphysical component to this. Because the more of us that come online, and the more of us who see with the high beams on, and are able to do it in a way where we're not afraid, we've dispelled the fear, and that the process itself is a way of dispelling the fear. And as we do this, then guess what happens? There is this shift and this transformation that's occurring so that more of this comes to light. I touched on this yesterday, that more of this is coming to light. So keep your faith, hold on to your faith. Don't be afraid to travel into the dark and to pull this stuff out and divest yourself of it and cleanse yourself of it, because it's really important. There's something big going on. And the big part is this revelatory experience that's happening at a collective and social level. So just hang in there. This is going to be an amazing kind of ride that we're on right now. The tides are turning. I don't know if you can feel it or not, but the tides are turning. When they try to pull off a bullshit event like Vegas, and people are not sniffing it. I mean, they're not buying it. They're sniffing around, and they can't sell that thing. Or even Northern California, Santa Rosa, that area, even hardened people who would not entertain something like an energy-directed weapon are now starting to wake up and say, well, what are these images? What are these flashing lights that really kind of look like lasers coming from the sky? What is this all about? When we get to that level, we're starting to break through the shale of complacency, the shale of I wouldn't call it ignorance, but people who are afraid to alter their worldview, because if they did, it would be completely shattered. We're moving past that now. This train, I'm going to use the train metaphor again, is accelerating. We're picking up momentum. The only thing that could completely derail this is a major event, and I mean a major event. And even then we have been so dialed in that we would know that major event would be to some degree manufactured, synthetic, whatever that is, okay? So wherever you are, and wherever you're listening to this, either through the stream or YouTube, just keep in mind that your effort to stay awake, that your effort to stay open, and open in the sense where, we're doing our best not to be engaged in any kind of level of schadenfreude or condemnation. Although sometimes, when we see something, we got to say something, as the adage goes. But your efforts are not in vain. Your efforts are not in vain, because they are adding to this critical mass that's taking place. So I just want to leave you with that. This is not wasted effort. This is not wasted energy on your part. And it's very difficult, because a lot of you have to stay strong in the face of people who are close to you, or that who will shout you down, who will shun you. Some of them will come around, and some of them won't. Okay? Just keep that in mind too. And ultimately, there's some big whales out there, and the big whales are going to be the test of the awakening. Let's put it that way. All right, this is Robert Phoenix. You've been listening to 15 Minutes of Flame. Thank you for joining me. I'll be back tomorrow with the Friday Farcast. We did this for about an hour today. I hope you enjoyed it. I'll see you tomorrow. Have a wonderful day. Use your head to discern what's real, your heart to say what's possible.